Terror at Ecuador's tourist beach. Five human heads found hanging amid escalating drug war violence. In a shocking display of brutality, five human heads were discovered hanging from ropes on a popular tourist beach in Ecuador. The gruesome incident occurred in Puerto Lopez, a well-known whale-watching town on the country's Pacific coast, as Ecuador continues to grapple with an unprecedented surge in drug-related violence. Now let's dive deeper and explore every layer of this story on our AI podcast.
We're going to dive into something pretty urgent today and frankly a really difficult situation. We're looking at the security crisis in Ecuador, which is just accelerating at an incredible rate.
It really is. And it's a necessary deep dive because what's happening there is, well, it's one of the most alarming shifts we've seen in Latin America in a long time.
Yeah, it's hard to square the country's old reputation, as the sort of island of peace with the reports we have now.
Exactly. And the sources we've compiled show this isn't just, a general rising crime. This is an organized, incredibly brutal campaign of violence, and it's all being driven by the global drug trade.
Okay, so our mission today is to really understand that breakdown. We want to get into the scale, the specific locations, and the mechanics of how organized crime got such a strong foothold so quickly.
The speed is key, and the sheer brutality of it all.
Right. And the one detail that really kicked off this deep dive for us, the thing that just captures the whole crisis, it's a horrific discovery from Manabí province. 5 severed human heads found hanging from ropes on a popular tourist beach in Puerto Lopez. Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start there. On the coast. What does that location, Puerto Lopez, tell us?
Well, the first thing that just jumps out is how incongruous the location is.
Incongruous how?
You're not talking about some remote jungle outpost or a gritty industrial port.
No.
This is Puerto Lopez. It's famous internationally. It's a major hub for whale watching. Tourists go there.
So to do something so gruesome right there on a public beach.
It's a calculated, terrifying message. It's theater, and it's meant for everyone to see, not just their rivals. The police investigation, well, it very quickly linked the act to these intense, ongoing turf wars between drug trafficking groups.
And there was a note, right? I read there was a handwritten note found nearby.
Yes, and that note is critical. It wasn't just a vague threat. It specifically called out people who were allegedly extorting local fishermen.
Wow. So that tells you how deep this goes.
Precisely. It shows how integrated the narco-violence now is with the local economy. I mean, when these groups are executing people for interfering with the fishing fleet, it shows they aren't just passing through, they are actively controlling the entire ecosystem they need to operate.
They're protecting their assets, and their asset is the fishing industry.
Exactly. They're eliminating any threat, even low-level extortionists, to lock down their control of the coast.
Which paints Manabí province as this new bloody focal point. And the reports show this wasn't just a one-off thing.
No, not at all. The intensity is what's so disturbing. That beheading, it was part of a huge spike in violence just that weekend. At least 9 people were killed in separate attacks across that one town.
Just in one weekend?
In one weekend. If you go back just a couple of weeks before that, there was a massacre. 6 people killed. Then, only 3 days after that, another attack in the nearby city of Manta. 6 more dead. Manabí is basically a war zone right now. It's where these local gangs, who are often, linked to the big Mexican cartels.
Sinaloa, Jalisco, New Generation.
All of them. They're fighting basically street by street for control of that coastline.
It's just staggering how fast this all happened. So that brings up the big question. How did we get here? What was the strategic shift that let Ecuador, the island of peace, become this central hub?
It's a multi-layered thing, but really at its core, it's about logistics. Ecuador has shifted from being a country that drugs just pass through.
A transit country.
Right, to now being a consolidation point, a hub. Think of it less like a highway and more like the main warehouse and shipping dock for the entire operation.
And why Ecuador? Why there?
A couple of reasons. First, there was a lot more pressure on the old routes, through Central America and the Caribbean. That pushed the cartels to look south. And second, Ecuador's geography is, from their perspective, perfect. It has these long, really porous borders with Colombia and Peru.
The world's top 2 cocaine producers.
The top 2.
Yeah.
So getting the raw product into the country is relatively easy.
So the supply is there, but the goal is to get it out. And that's where the coastline comes back into play.
Exactly. And this is where it links right back to the violence in Manabí. The cartels are exploiting what you could call low-profile logistics.
What do you mean by that?
They're not just relying on huge container ships, although that happens too. They are heavily, heavily dependent on local knowledge and local assets.
The fishermen.
The fishermen. If you connect this to the bigger picture, the cartels either pay off or coerce local fishermen to use their small, fast boats. These boats, they blend in. They're almost impossible to track on radar, and the guys driving them know every cove, every inlet.
So the violence we're seeing in Puerto Lopez is basically a fight to control that specific distribution network?
That's it. The local economy has been hijacked to serve the narco state.
Which paints a really grim picture of just how deep this infiltration goes. The local police are obviously overwhelmed.
Completely. Which is why the government has had to take such drastic steps.
It's a state of emergency.
That's right. It's currently in force in 9 of the country's 24 provinces. That includes all the critical coastal ones, like Manabí.
And what does that mean practically for people on the ground?
Well, it's a big deal. It means the government can restrict certain civil rights. They can implement curfews, for example. But the most important part is that it allows the armed forces, the military, to take on policing roles.
So you have soldiers on the streets doing patrols?
Yes. Conducting searches, making arrests, all with fewer constitutional restrictions. The goal is to hit these gang structures hard and fast.
It shows they recognize this isn't just a crime wave anymore, it's an existential threat. Okay, so that covers the coast. But now we need to look at the hard numbers, because the speed of this collapse on a national scale, is what's really shocking.
The numbers are, well, they're breathtaking.
Yeah.
And they really show how the whole country has been engulfed by this over just the last 4 or 5 years.
So give us the scale. What did the official data for last year actually tell us?
2025 became, without a doubt, the most violent year in Ecuador's recorded history. The country finished the year with more than 9,000 homicides.
9,000.
Over 9,000. And to give you some context for that number, it didn't just break the old record, it shattered it. The previous record was set just the year before, in 2023, at about 8,200.
So it's still accelerating.
Massively. If you look at the trajectory from 5 years ago, before this crisis really took off, we're talking about an 8-fold increase in the murder rate.
An 8-fold increase. That's not a surge. That's a complete security collapse.
It fundamentally changes daily life for everyone in the country.
And it's important to stress this isn't just happening on the coast, right? The reports show the violence has seeped into cities far inland.
That's a vital point. It shows the crisis is generalized now. The gangs aren't just fighting over ports. They're fighting for control of everything. Extortion rackets, local drug markets, even social spaces like bars or community centers.
And we have specific examples of that in the source material.
We do. For instance, back in October, 5 people were gunned down in a pool hall in Santo Domingo.
Which is a big city west of the capital, Quito.
Exactly, far from the coast. Police sources confirmed it was a targeted, gang-related hit.
So they're turning these normal, everyday places into battlegrounds.
Absolutely. And with escalating ruthlessness. Just a month before that, in September, there was another pool hall attack. That one left 7 people dead and 4 wounded.
7 dead.
Yeah, that was one of the single deadliest shootings of the entire year. They're using maximum force to send a message that they can strike anywhere.
And it's even reached the point where very public figures are being targeted.
Yes, and that really ensures that nobody can ignore this crisis. The reports highlighted the killing in December of a former international soccer player, Mario Pineda. He was only 33.
And where did that happen?
In Guayaquil, Ecuador's largest city and its main economic engine. He was killed along with another person in an armed attack. When you have public figures of that stature being murdered in broad daylight in your biggest city, it just proves that these criminal groups are operating with a terrifying level of impunity everywhere.
From the smallest fishing village to the biggest metropolis.
The entire territory.
Okay. That brings us to the end of our deep dive into the source material. It's a really chilling picture. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Let's try and pull this all together. We've traced this terrifyingly fast shift in Ecuador's security. It went from a relatively safe country to a violent strategic hub for cartels in less than 4 years. The evidence is everywhere. You have the record-breaking homicide numbers, over 9,000 last year, and this generalized violence hitting cities like Guayaquil. But the core of the story, as we've seen, is on that coast. In places like Manabí, where transnational cartels are hijacking local economies like the fishing industry to fuel their global trade.
The speed and the scale, those are the key takeaways.
Exactly.
And this whole situation, it raises a really important question that you now have the context to think about. The source material shows us that these criminal groups are so successful because they're woven into legitimate local industries, right?
Yeah.
The fishing economy is the perfect example.
Right.
They control it, and they ruthlessly eliminate anyone who gets in their way. So given that deep, deep level of integration, how effective can a temporary measure, like a state of emergency, really be? That's the core challenge. How do you separate the criminal economy from the daily legal life of the country when they've become so intertwined? That is the complex problem facing Ecuador right now, and it's one you are now much better equipped to analyze as this situation develops.
Keep digging, keep connecting those dots between the global logistics and the security on the ground. Thanks for joining us for this necessary, if deeply disturbing, deep dive.
Okay, one question for you. What led to the discovery of 5 seaward human heads on a tourist beach in Ecuador? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.